Today, Mitzvah Shabbos, Mevorchim El. Today's Daf is Daf Mem Hey. We'll begin at the beginning of the Sugya Mandal on the base, in the very bottom of the page. So let's begin from there. Tony Shilek, 3 lines from the bottom of the page.
I'll make a suggestion. Everybody mute themselves, and the ones who haven't got their cameras on, turn them on so we can see you.
Tony Shila learned Sholish Midas Benaira. There are 3 different kind of cases when it comes to the Naira Marasa. Now we're not talking about a Moiti Shamra, we're talking about a woman who was engaged and a Naira Hamarasa. She was a Naira at the time, and she committed adultery. And if there are witnesses that saw the event, she is Chayiv Misa as well as he. She is Chayiv Skila. A married woman only gets Chenek, which is a much lighter punishment. But a Marasa gets Skila, and it's only a Naira. Once she's a Begeres, once she's over 12 and a half years old, if she committed Nus with witnesses, she only gets Chenek. It's only in that window while she was a Naira. And there are 3 different possibilities. So Tony Shila learns. Shalish Midas Benaira. There are 3 different kinds of cases by a Naira. Case number 1. Bo'ula Edim. That witnesses came along. Bebeis Chamer, she's already married. She's living with her in-laws or with her husband and in his family, and they're saying she's zinsa, but now she's married. But the witnesses are saying she's zinsa bebeis avir, that in the past tense she was mezana while she was engaged. So now it's after the marriage, living with her husband, but she was mezana while she was engaged, living in her family's house. Then 2 things. First of all, Saiklinoisa, she gets skila. And number 2, Al Pesach Beisavir. Where do they punish her? They punish her near her home. And why do they do that? So the husband can say, it never happened while we were together. It happened before we were together. It happened by her father's house. And Kolemen, we say, Ru'u Gidulim Shigidalton. Look what kind of child you raised. Sometimes we say that in a positive way. Here it's being said in a negative way. So the husband is sort of saying,
you're holding at the moment.
Mem, Hey, Ahmed, Aleph on top of the page. 2 lines on top of the page. So case number 1 is the agent came after she was married, living with her husband, that she was Mazana prior to her marriage while she was still at home. So she gets skila because she was a Naira Marasa, plus it's Pesach Beisavia. Case number 2. The Adim came. Now, this has nothing to do with Moiti Shemra. The husband's not involved. The Adim came on their own. Remember, Moiti Shemra, as we'll see later, is only the husband summons the Adim. So the Adim came along while they were still engaged. They weren't married yet. And Bebei while she's living in her father's house, and they came along and they say, Shezinsa Bebei that she committed adultery. There were 2 witnesses or so. Again, the din is Saikanaisa gets skila, but here it's different. Where do you make the skila? Al Pesach Shari'ir. Here you want to publicize it, so they do that in the doorway of the Shari'ir, of the gate of the city. That's case number 2. Case number 3. What happens, Sarcha? What happens that she committed a sin, that she was mezana while she was engaged and she was a naira? Ulubesayf bagra, but before the witnesses came or before it was tried in court, she now became an adult. She's no longer a naira. And the Torah says it's a naira hamarasa. But here, what happened was the sin was committed while she was a naira, but the sentencing and the trial didn't happen until she was a begeris. What punishment does she get here? Does she get the punishment at the time of the sin when she was a naira, which is skila, or the punishment now as a begeris? Because if she would have committed the sin today, she would only receive chenek, even though she's engaged, but she's already an adult. So what punishment does she receive? The din is tidun bechenek. She receives a lighter punishment, chenek, because we look at the time of the trial. Had she committed a sin today, what punishment she would have received? So remember, the Gemara says, it seems clear from here, you're telling me that if her body changed, in other words, she's no longer a naira and as a lesson, now she is an adult, therefore the punishment changes along with it, because we look at the time of the trial. That's what you're telling me. So let me ask you a question. But I'll ask you a question from another case. This is the case of Moiti Shemra. Moiti Shemra is similar, but one difference. The husband then claims, the newlywed, the husband claims that I just discovered that my wife was not a psula, like I was like I assumed. And here are my witnesses that she was mezana while we were engaged. Okay, so that's called a naira. Now, what happens? There are two possibilities. Either he's telling the truth or he's not. If he is telling the truth, then she gets punished. She was a naira marasha, she gets skilla. But if he's not telling the truth, then what happens here is he brought witnesses. Two things happen. He has to pay 100 shkolim. He gets 39 lashes for concocting this story. The witnesses who said that she committed znus, it turned out to be they were liars because we brought in another pair of witnesses who say, you weren't even there at the time. How can you testify this? In other words, it's Ainus, I mean. Then the witnesses get killed. Whatever they try to do to her, they get to happen to him. So they get killed. And so it says as follows. Naida Hamurasa. So let's say the case of a Naira Rasa was in a case of Moiti Shemra. Shezinsa. So she was Mezana while she was engaged. When did he make the Shemra about her? After she became an adult. So based on what you said before, in this case over here, that the punishment for her should be chenek, because the trial is taking place after she became an adult. Yet it says here as follows: Who einu loike ve'einu noisemeh, because she's no longer a naira, he doesn't get the punishment, the penalties that we say about spreading a false story about a naira, because she's no longer a naira at the moment, she's an adult. But she, this and the witnesses that were found to be liars, magdimin lebeis haskila. We bring them straight away to the house of stoning. In other words, they get killed. So before we talk about that, the Morada, we said, what are you talking about? They both get killed. If they're telling the truth, then she gets killed. If they're not telling the truth, then she's innocent, then they get killed. What do you mean they both get killed? You think they both get killed? This is just a digression. There's a word missing. He meant either her or them. Magdimin lebeis haskila. What do you mean magdimin lebeis haskila? You bring them, as Rashi says, first thing in the morning, because there's no way out. Clear as the sun that she's guilty. Let's say, and they stone her. That's magdimin lebeis haskila. Tosfos Marcus says magdimin lebeis haskila means that all of these punishments. There are four different categories of punishments in Mrs. Besden. What happens if, for whatever reason, they're unable to administer the punishment that she deserves, or he deserves, whatever the case may be? Then we commute it to the next level. If you can't do that, you commute it to the next level. So magdim lebeis haskila means we first try to do the skila, which is the punishment that is for this particular sin. Other Rishonim, like Rashi, disagrees. They say that only applies to chenek and hedek, not to skila. Skila will always make sure that someone who's entitled to skila gets skila. Anyway, so the question here is very simple. You said before that if she became a begeris, let's say Aiden Zayman said that she was, by the time it came to court, the trial, she was already an adult. Then we try her like an adult. Had she committed a sin today, she would only get chenek. That's the punishment she gets. When it comes to Moiti Shemra, even though it happened while she was a naira, if the trial happened while she was an adult, we will give her skila. What's the difference? That's the question. So Rava is going to come along and say there's a difference between the case of Moiti Shemra and an ordinary case of Eidim that she committed znus. And why should there be a difference? Because there's something novel about Moiti Shemra that we don't have in other cases. And because we find one aspect of Moiti Shemra novel, we'll say that this aspect, the punishment that she receives, even though she's an adult, and if she was tried as an adult, she will receive the punishment of a naira. And that is what? Amar says Rava, Moiti Shemra Ka'amrit. You want to introduce the case of Moiti Shemra and ask a question from that? Shiny Moiti Shemra. Moiti Shemra is very different. Why is it different? The chiddush hu, the entire concept of Moiti Shemra has an enormous chiddush. And what is that? If a woman gets, as long as she's engaged and she committed znus, she gets skila. If she gets married and she committed znus, she only gets chenek. What happens? She got married. She's still a naira. But she did not have relations with her husband yet, and she had and committed znus. Then the din is that she only gets chenek and not skila. That's a regular din. And yet by every Moiti Shemra, what happens is he got married to her, and he says, "Look, we got married that night, and I didn't find any blood. So they definitely got married during Moiti Shemra, and yet we're going to give her skila if she's still a naira. We'll definitely give her skila." Now, the question is why? Any other woman, once she got married, even if she had no relations with her husband, if she would have committed a sin right then and there, she would only get chenek. and yet this Naira Marasa gets skilla. So it shows you the entire concept of Moitzi Shemra is unique. And therefore, don't ask me a question about Moitzi Shemra, and now that she's an adult, how come she's being tried while she's an adult, she's getting the punishment of a Naira? Moitzi Shemra is different. Says different than the original case, which is just two witnesses coming forward. Says the Gemara, shiny Moitzi Shemra is different. The chiddush, the entire thing is novel. The nichlas al chuppah. Generally, if somebody gets married, even though she had no relations, generally since, and let's say before she had relations with her husband, after she got married, and she was mezana bechenek, she gets chenek, the punishment of chenek, which is the most lenient punishment of the four capital punishments. Yet the ilu moitzi shemra, and if in the case of a moitzi shemra, he got married to her, and he accuses her of being mazana while she was engaged, and even though right now she's still a naira, biskila, she'll get skila. Even though if she would have done the Veda this minute, she would only get chenek. So we see that moitzi shemra is unique. That's what Rava wants to say. Comes along one of Rava's students. Rava's two main students was Rav Papa and Rav Huna B'rei Yeshua. Comes along Rav Huna B'rei Yeshua, who's very sharp, and he said to Rava, "What are you talking about? How are your chiddush that you're discussing by Moitzi Shemra is very different than the chiddush we're talking about over here. We're talking about over here. Your chiddush in Moitzi Shemra is that even though yesterday she was not married, today she's married, and a normal woman after she got married, she would only get chenek if she committed znus. But this woman here is going to get this naira marasa is going to get skilla by Moitzi Shemra. Over here, the woman hasn't physically changed. Her body has not gone through a physiological change. It's only a question whether she walked into the chuppah, didn't walk into the chuppah. Okay, so the Torah tells you, Moitzi Shemra, even though it happened after she got married, accusing her while she was engaged, that she was mezana, there were witnesses, she gets killed. We're talking about a case here where the trial happened after her body changed. She became an adult. And then she was tried. And over here, because the body changed, a different person, had she committed a sin right now, she would only get chenek. It's a different person. So maybe in this case over here, you will get only chenek, even though we're talking about the case when she was a naira, a girl. But the fact is, right now when she's being tried, her body changed. Therefore, she gets the punishment of today. So he says it. When the Torah made this chiddush, her body didn't change; she just went to the chuppah. But where the body actually changed, like she became an adult. There's nowhere the Torah says that that I'm still going to treat her like a naira. So therefore, it's correct shilas 3 dinim, and it's correct that if she was the Adam come along after she became an adult and tell the story about what happened when she was a naira, we view it as if she's an adult, and therefore she'll only get chenek. I'll tell you the following. In fact, this whole debate that we're having here, I can show you somewhere else. Forget about Moitzi Shemra. What Shilei said is actually an argument of Tanoim. If the girl now is a begeris, how do we treat her? Do we say like she's a naira, and because the fact that she committed a sin while she's a naira, and therefore that's how we deal with it, or because today during the trial she's an adult, we'll deal with her as an adult. She only gets chenek. That is an argument tonight, but forget Moitzi Shemra. That's totally unrelated. And what's the story? The story is as follows. The din is that a person worships avodah zarah. So there's different kabbanas that you bring. It depends who you are. And that is, let's say if an ordinary person brings either a sheep or a goat. If you are a nasi, you bring only a sheep, only a goat. If you are a kohen gadol, you actually bring a par, a bull. So what happened when you committed the sin? You were an hedjit, an ordinary person, but by the time you were going to bring a carbon, suddenly you became a kohen gadol. Suddenly you became a nasi. What kind of carbon do you bring? So we have an argument. Say we see again. Do we look at it at the time of the sin, or do we look at the time of when we're dealing with the consequences of the sin? So the Gemara. It's an argument tonight. Let's say somebody committed a sin before they were appointed to become a nasi, or before they became a kohen gadol. And so as a hedjid, ordinary person, when you committed a sin at that time, all you have to bring is a goat or a sheep. As a nasi, you bring a goat, and as a kohen gadol, you bring a bull. So Rab Shimon, so the Chotev Sesmanu in Ismanu, then you're pointed at Harei Henket Yates. We look at the time of the sin. At the time of the sin, you're a hedjit. That's the kind of carbon you bring. So we see clearly. You look at the time of sin, not the current time right now. And so even though l'chayda their body changed in a way, It's a little bit hard to understand how your body actually changed. When you're an ordinary person, you become a nasi. It's more a legal thing rather than like a begeris, which is a body change. But Rashi learns, other Shai learn differently. But Rashi learns when a person becomes a nasi, a leader, it's not just, suddenly you became, you have more coverage and everything else. Your entire person changed. And it impacts on you as well physiologically. And we saw that with Azariah. As soon as he became a nasi, suddenly he had a white beard. So we see that it's not just a legal status. Becoming a nasi or a rav can actually have a change in the person himself, physically. So therefore, and yet we look at it at the time we committed the sin. However, Rab Shimon says, Im lehem. Rab Shimon says, if it became known to them, Nismanu, Rab Shimon says, if they were aware before they were appointed of the sin, not only they committed a sin, but they were aware that they could be talking about b'shegig, you have to bring a carbon, right? At the time you did the sin, you weren't aware you did a sin. But if you became aware you did a sin before they actually were appointed to whatever the new position is, then chayavim. Then they have to bring the carbon as an ordinary person. However, mission is manu. If they were not aware they committed a sin until after they were already appointed, became a kohen gadol, and so on and so forth, then Peturim, they're totally exempt from a carbon. So what do you see from here? That because their body changed, we don't look at it anymore at the time of the sin, we look at it the way it's right now. So the carbon changes. So we see that this idea that Shila said, that if she committed a sin while she was an Ira, and then wasn't brought to Bezdin until she's a Begeris, and do we treat her as an Ira where you get skila? Do you treat her as Begeris, you get chenek, is an argument between Rab Shimon and the Tanakam. However, the Gemara says, I don't see the comparison at all. Why not? Rab Shimon is saying something totally different, the Gemara says. Rab Shimon is saying that if you, let's say, became a Kohen Gadol, doesn't say bring a bull. He says you bring nothing. If you were not aware that you committed a sin until you became a Kohen Gadol, you bring nothing. In other words, what's he saying? It's not a question of looking at the time of sin or looking at the time of when you're trying, the consequences of the sin. Then you should bring a carbon like a Kohen Gadol, a bull. Rather, what he's saying here is that in order to be chayiv a carbon, then you had to not only commit the sin, but you also had to be aware that you committed a sin at the same time. If the idea and the sin are not at the same time, then there's no carbon at all, which is a totally different thing. Says the Gemara, when does Rabbi Shimon say thing, the idea that you go, the also you also need to know when the idea is the also bossy idea. He never said that we don't look at the time of the sin, we look only at the time of the consequences. Because then he should have said, because Im Kain, he should have said, Laisi carbon kidahashta. Then whatever status you are now, let's say you're a nasi, you should bring a carbon like a nasi. If you're a kohen gadol, bring a carbon like a kohen gadol. It doesn't say that. Which means he's not saying it's a question of before or now. Rather, he's saying that even before, you need to have the idea and the sin at the same time while you're in the same status. Mashur par or nasi seir. If you're a kohen gadol, bring a bull. If you're a nasi, go ahead and bring a goat. Doesn't say that. Says the Gemara. So therefore, it's totally different. So Nach Mischak was completely repudiated. Says the Gemara, an answer. So you want to know, Rabbi Yechon said, Latana. So we go back to Shila. Shila said that you look at it, that if right now there are begettes, that begettes, how come you get the punishment of today, which is chenek, rather than punishment than a skila? And we asked the question from right to Shemer or whatever. So Gemara says, and here we see clearly, for example, in the case of the carbon, that you only look, everyone agrees, you look at the time of the sin. We don't look at the time of the consequence, look at the time of the sin. So you're right. Rabbi Yechon actually said to the Tana, Tani, you have to actually amend the brisa. Say Tidan Beskila. That third case, you actually get skila. That third case where she was the agent said, well, she was an Ira, she committed nus, and then the court trial was only when she's a begeris. Don't say and she gets chenek, say she gets skila, because you look at the time of the sin. So the Gemara, okay. Gemara said, why taka? Why? The Torah said that she had to be a naira. She had to be an adult, an adolescent between 12 and 12 and a half. But right now, the trial, she's over 12 and a half. Why taka do you get chenek? Because the pasuk says, ha naira, that you bring out the naira and you punish her. What do you mean, naira? Not that she's a naira currently. As long as when she committed the sin, she was an Naira, that's sufficient to say that she get punished, and the punishment of an Naira. So we're going back and we're saying we look at the time of the sin, and at the time of the sin she's a naira, regardless of today the trial is when she at the trial she's a begettes. So that's a very simple question. We made before a distinction between her punishment and his punishment. We said as far as her punishment is concerned, we treat her like a naira, but as far as his punishment is concerned, we treat her like a begeres, so he doesn't get the lashes, doesn't get the monetary penalty. Why? If you're telling me we look at the time of the sin, what's the difference him and her? So Lilki, why doesn't he get punished the lashes? Why doesn't he pay the 100 shkalim as well? If we treat her as a naira, then as far as he's concerned, it was a naira and he lied. He should be penalized. Amalei. He said to him that seems that Hananya Beloy had a problem with having arguments because we have exactly the same discussion in Gemara Bava Kama. Heaven forbid, or heaven should protect me for such a weird thing that you just said. So he answered back, very profound. Adarabba, heaven should protect me from your opinions. That was their whole conversation. We have exactly the same conversation in the seventh paragraph of Bava Kama. But obviously, what he's saying here is that you made a statement that there's a difference between the man and the woman, and you gave no reason. You just said that's how it is. That's not how you deal with it. And the other guy said it's such an obvious difference. I'm not going to bother answering you. So you just put him down. So the Gemara has to step in and say, "But time am I?" So what is the logic? Why should there be a difference between her punishment and his punishment? Regarding her, we treat her as a lesson. Regarding him, we treat her as an adult. Rabbi Yitzchak said, very simple. And it's so simple, that's why he didn't bother answering him. He didn't have the patience. Mother said, Zu, I'll tell you very simply, what's her sin and what's his sin? Her sin is the actual act. Right? She committed znus. His sin, if it turned out to be a lie, what was his sin? He concocted a story, which is a Baba Maisa. So let's think about it for a minute. When did she commit her sin and when did he commit his sin? If she committed a sin, it's her sin that's causing her to be killed. And him, it's what the story that he made up. When did it happen? If it's true, she wasn't a naira. So therefore, that's what happened. But over here, if he lied, when did he commit that sin? Right now, standing in the court and telling us this whole story. When is he liable? At that moment. Because the whole thing wasn't true. And at that moment already, she was a begeres. When he made up this whole story, that's when he committed a sin. And she was already an adult. So he committed a sin while she's an adult. So therefore, he doesn't get penalized because only an naira. If she committed a sin, it was while she was a naira. And therefore, she's treated like a naira. The Gemara continues, turn Rabbanan, we learn Naira Hamorasa Shazinsa. We learned a Naira Hamorasa that committed znus while she was engaged, while she was a Naira, cycling Oisa, where do you stone her? Al Pesach Beisavir. You stone her at the house of the parents, and we say Rugidolim Shekidalta. Look what kind of children you raised. Ein la Pesach Beisav. Let's say they don't have a house. So we had cycling Oisa Pesach Sharahir. So where do you then stone her? In front of the gates of the city. What about a year Sheruba Oivde Kachavim? What about a city where the majority of the people are goyim? So it's no longer considered your gates. Sharecha, it says it's sharecha, your gates. It's no longer your gates because the majority of the citizens of that community of that city are goyim. So therefore, the gates don't belong to us. Then we stone her al Pesach Bezdin, the doorway of the Bezdin. That doesn't mean literally the doorway of the Bezdin. You're not allowed to because we'll have the Gemara Sanhedrin. There has to be some distance between where the punishments are administered and the Bezdin, so to give some time. If anybody knows a schus, anybody could defend her, they can come over and defend her. So we have to make it some distance from the Bezdin, but it means somewhere in the vicinity. We have a similar thing about Avodah Zarah. If somebody, let's say, worshipped idols, so the punishment is skila, and where do you punish him? The gate where the person actually committed the sin. What about the Be'ir Sheruba Oivdicham? If the majority of people are going, it's no longer considered your gates. Then so go to Pesach Bezin. Then you do on the doorway of the Bezin. Says the Gemara Benohanimili. How do we know this? How do we know this? So Gemara says, the doorway of the gate of the city. It's not the gate of the city, the gate of the Bezin. How do we know? The Torah we learned. It says in Pasuk. It says the pasuk of the person who committed a sin. It says, "Sha'arecha," you should bring them out to your gates, and that's where you stone them. Sha'arecha, your gates. Which gate is that? So we're talking about by worshiping the idol. We're talking about over here. It's the gate where he committed the sin. You say it's the gate that he committed the sin. In other words, we don't care where the court was. We might have been judged in another city altogether. But we go back to the gates of the city where he worshipped the idol, and that's where they get punished. You say it's the gate of the city that he committed a sin. Maybe taka the gates of the city where the trial was held. How do we know? Because Nemar, it says in one pasuk, it says in one pasuk, and in Nemar sharecha l'mayla. And another pasuk, it says the word sharecha. So we have the word sharecha written in two places. It says that you should take that person out to the sharecha, and by the Zohar it says sharecha as well. It says you take out that person and bring them to sharecha. And ma sharecha amulamayla shash avaba. Just like by the Zohar, it's clearly the gate where where the person worshipped. So af sharecha amulamata shash avaba. The gate that it says over here. Down here is also talking about the sharecha that they serve, that they worshipped. And davar achar, furthermore, it says your gates, and therefore we learn it has to be a Jewish city. But if it's a Goyish city, it can be the punishment cannot take place at the gates of the city. So what is it? It's then the shar of the Bezdin. Says the Gemara, and Hai Sharecha, you just told us the word Sharecha, or Afikte, you just said that you needed it to teach you that which gates is it? Not the gates where the Bezin is, but the gates where you worship. So how can you learn two separate dinim from the same word, Sharecha? Says the Gemara, Im Kain, if it's only meant to learn one word, Leim across Shar. Let it say Shar, gate, Ma Sharecha, your gates, Shema Mina Tarti. So we know two things from here. That it has to be the gate where you worship, because in one place it says they worship at the gates, another place says you take them out to the gates and you punish them. So obviously it's the same gates where they worship. And then also you could have said shar, says sharecha. It's only if the majority of the citizens are Eden, the majority of goyim, then we got to move them to the gates of the Bezdin. So now all we know from here is Ashkan Avechavim. So all of this, what we just learned right now, is regarding idol worship. Where exactly is the punishment meant to be? So we say not the gates of the Bezdin, but the gates of the city you worship, unless you have no choice. However, Naida Merasim known. How do you know when it comes to the case of a Naida Merasa, this girl, that she also gets punished by the gates of the city?
Didn't all the cities have two gates?
Sorry?
Didn't all the cities have two gates?
No.
They closed like that? Or?
No, there was one entrance to a city. There was a wall all around it, a fortified city, and there was one main entrance, which was monitored all the time.
But the main entrance usually had two gates, didn't it?
Yeah. So that's what it means. But there's no
they
gates.
are gates.
Yeah, but it means the entrance of the city. That entrance, whatever that entrance is, wherever that entrance is. Yeah, but anyway, so therefore, but if it's a Goyish city, then it cannot be considered Shorecha.
I've just lost the place. What page are we on?
45b2, right-hand column, third paragraph or second paragraph.
Shkoyach.
Amar Rabavu says, I'll tell you how we learn out. Goma, we learn out Pesach. It says in the pasuk over there by a Naira Maros, it says you should take the Naira out, El Pesach Beisavir, right, to the doorway of Beisavir. And then it says also by Avodah Zarah, it says it says by the Mishkan. It says in the Mishkan, it says, and the curtain of the Pesach, the opening, Shara Chatzah. So it has the same word Pesach, like by Naira Marasa, Pesach Beisavir. It says here Pesach Shar by the Mishkan, but right next to the word Pesach, it says the word Shar. So we see that a Pesach, an opening, is related to a gate. So we go back to Naira Marasa, we say, when it says Pesach, it also means a gate. And then once we know that when it says Pesach, it means a gate, we say it means the gate of the city. Just like by Avodah Zarah. Rashi said it's not a real Gzer Shava, it's merely an asmachta. Tanaban we learned Hamoitzi Shemra, we learned somebody is Moitzi Shemra, like if somebody, let's say, is Moitzi Shemra, what's his punishment? He made up a story about his wife. He gets Malchus, the Noisen Meyasela, and he gives 100 Ishkolim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lilkais, when it comes to Malchus, I don't care, like him, whether he physically had any relations with his wife, whether he did not have any relations with his wife, nevertheless, he always get Malchus, because Rabbi Yehuda says that a lav she'ain by Maisa, even though it's a lav that he didn't do any activity, he just spoke words, nevertheless, you will get Malchus. Fine. But Meya Sela, when does he have to pay the 100 shkolim? Only Baal Noisen, only if he had physical relations with his wife. And then he made up the story. Does he have to pay the monetary amount? But Loy Baal Einu Noisen. But if he did not have any physical relationships with her and he just went to the Bezdin and made up the story, he does not have to pay that $100. Says the Gemara, what's this argument? So it seems from here that the Tanakama says, I don't care whether they had relations or not. If he made up a story, he gets penalized, lashes, and money. Yehuda says lashes, you're right. But when it comes to money, only if they had relations. What's going on here? Says the Gemara would seem, they're arguing in the same argument of Rabbi Lezer and Yaakov and Rabbanan, which you can learn tomorrow. There's an argument of Lezer and Rabbanan whether they had to have relations in order to be Moitzi Shemra, or even didn't have relations. The Hochi, and therefore, let's go back to the Tanakama. Tanakama doesn't spell out anything. All Tanakama says is that if you're a Moitzi Shemra, you get Malchus and 100 shkolim. Doesn't mention whether you did have relations, didn't have relations. It's Rabbi Yehuda comes along and makes a distinction. No relations, you pay, you get the lashes, but you don't pay the money. Relations, you get both. So we're going to assume that the Tanakama, who's arguing Rabbi Yehuda, holds that regardless of whether you had relations or not, you'll always pay both penalties. And Rabbi Yehuda limits it only to lashes. This is what the Tanakama is saying here. Hamoiti Shemra, like you get lashes, and V'naisin Meyasela, and you pay the monetary amount. Bain Ball, whether you had relations, Bain Light Ball, whether you didn't have relations. Kirabanan. In other words, they hold exactly like Tanakama, it seems to be exactly Rabbanan. Comes along Rabbi Yehud, and he limits it. He says no. Lil Kais, when it comes to the lashes, I agree with you, like he says, when it comes to the lashes, you get the whether you had relations, whether you didn't have relations, because he says, I learn out lashes from a pasuk. We'll see in the Gemara tomorrow. They say, Rachel, you shouldn't go around and spread, and slander somebody, and that's where the lashes come from. So it's irrelevant if you had relations or not. It's not do with Shemra. It's a general rule. You shouldn't make up stories and commit slander. And even though it's a lav she'ein boy ma'isa, you still get lashes, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But Meya Seller, the $100, that has to do with Moitzi Shemra. That's unique to Moitzi Shemra, paying the 100 shkolim. And by Moitzi Shemra, Ball, if you just read the context of the Pesukim, as we'll see tomorrow's Gemara, it looks like they had an actual relationship. And as it says there, he said, I didn't find any blood there. And the father takes out a sheet and says, yes, there is blood. So in other words, there was a relationship. So if it's tagged to Moitzi Shemra, there has to be a relationship between them. But the lashes are not because of the unique din of Moitzi Shemra. It has more to do with generally slandering another person. Let's say Rachel. So that's one understanding. There's another way of understanding is as follows. So the first way we understood is the Tanakama holds like the Rabbanon, whether they had a relation, whether they didn't have a relation, all punishments are there. And Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction between the two. The other way, the other way around.
If he didn't have relations, how does he know?
Sorry? There were two witnesses. Remember, there are witnesses here. So he's saying, I'm relying on the witnesses. Turned out to be the witnesses were liars. They were caught lying. They were Muslim by Adam Zayn. He said, how can you say that in that particular day she committed
Zonim and they get what they wanted for her?
Sorry?
If they're aiding Zonim, that's why I don't understand this whole thing. If they're aiding Zonim, they get what they wanted to do to her.
100%. But since he brought the Adam since he brought, that he was complicit with the lie, but he didn't physically go to Bezin and he can be an aid, so he doesn't get that kind of punishment. What punishment he does get is the malchus and the money. That's what Meitzah Shemra is. That he brought the Eidim, even if he didn't have a relation with her. So how can he say that? It's the Eidim who was saying it, but he commissioned them, he hired them. So that's why we'll see the Gemara tomorrow whether he actually had to pay them money, or even if he didn't pay the money, he just commissioned them to come along and come up with this full story. Ikadami, so the other version of Tanakama is not that Tanakama says, I don't care whether there was relation, not a relation, you always get punished. Maybe Kula Krabaz Yaakov. That no, the Tanakama holds like a Lezer Yaakov, which is as follows. This is what he's saying. If you spread stories, you get malchus, and with Naisim Mesel, you pay the 100 shkalim, but when Wushabal, the Tanakama holds, provided you had relations, then you get both punishments. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, no, there's a difference between Lilka is like Malchus, yes. I don't care if you had relations or not, because Malchus is not a din in Meitzah Shemra. Malchus is because you slandered someone, let's say like Rachel, and therefore you get Malchus. And it's a lav she'ein by Maisa, you get lashes for that. He holds lav she'ein by Maisa like it. We learn more Malchus in other places. In all cases. However, when it comes to Meitzah Shemra, when it comes to the $100 that you're shkolim, you're right. It has to be only if there's relation. Says the Gemara, are you going to tell me the Savar Rabbi Yehuda, Lilka is like him, you're going to tell me Rabbi Yehuda holds that you always get lashes, even if they had no relations? The Hatanya, didn't we learn? Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Baal like loy Baal ain't like it. Didn't we learn? Rabbi Yehuda says, if they had relations, you get malchus. But if they had no relations, you don't get malchus. Rabbi Yehuda clearly said, if they had no relations, you don't get malchus. Contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rab Nachman by Yitzchak. When he said here, you don't get malchus, doesn't mean you don't get malchus. He holds you always get lashes, whether you had relations or not. But like where he says that if you did not have relations, what kind of lashes do you get? Makis mardis b'drabanan. Malchus d'Rabbanan is called Mardus. Mardus means because you're a traitor, you're a rebel. So it's called Malchus Mardus. What exactly Malchus Mardus is a big argument in Rishonim. Some say that it's even stricter than ordinary Malchus. Ordinary Malchus, you get 39 lashes, but Malchus Mardus is infinite until the person is prepared to do tshuva and reform and never do it again. Others say that Malchus Mardus is definitely less than Malchus, but they don't give a number to it. Other Rishonim make a pshara. They say it depends what the Malchus Mardus is. For example, the Rambam says that if you eat matzah erev Pesach, you get Malchus Mardus ad sheteitze nafshe. He uses the expression that you get Malchus Mardus until you die, unlimited, if you don't stop eating the matzah. So some Rishonim learn as follows, sort of compromise. If we're talking about an Avera he did yesterday, and the rabbi said we should give him malchus, then there's a limit how many malchus you give. It's called ba'omer. We call the doctor. We work out roughly what you can receive, and that's what you get. But if you're continually doing the Avera, like the Rambam's case, you're continuing to eat matzah and erev Pesach, then we continue to give you malchus. And if you refuse to stop, we'll continue to give malchus. If you die, you die. So be it. But the bottom line here is Rabbi Yehuda holds that you, when it comes to Meitzah Shemra, just like the Tanakama, according to this version, only if you had relations. If you did not have relations, you will get lashes because you're spreading slander, but it's only midrabanan, it's only Malchus Mardus. So just a few more lines. Says the Gemara on the next page, Memvav Manal, very top of the page. Rav Papa says, no, definitely you get full Malchus. You get full Malchus. So what does it mean? Rabbi Yehuda holds you get malchus from the Torah, because it says Loiselich Rachel, you shouldn't spread slander, you'll get malchus from the Torah. So what does it mean in the second brayso? Rabbi Yehuda says, but if you had no relations, you don't get malchus. My ball like a diktani. What do you mean that only if you had relations you get malchus, and if you don't, you don't? Hasam mammon. The word when he says like, he didn't mean, you understood like it to mean lashes, which that's normally how we translate. Here, like it means afflicted with a punishment. But you know which punishment we're talking about? Money. And money is only if you had relations, like Rabbi Lezer Yaakov. And how do we see that? The more asked right away, what do you mean? You're paying money and you call that word like? Yes, I'll show you. But nan, because we learned in a Mishnah. I'm going to show you that the word like can also refer to a monetary punishment as well. It means afflicted. Doesn't necessarily have to mean lashes. So if you hold, you get lashes from the Torah. And when he says over here, if you had even if you had no relations, because I say Rachel, when it says over here, you don't get lashes if you're not. If it says over here, you don't get lashes if you had no relation, he meant you don't get a monetary punishment. Where do we find that? The din is, if a person says, I'm going to donate to the base of Mikdash my value, dummy, my value, then we work out what your value is. We put you on the slave market. What would someone pay for you? But if you say, we had in the Chumash and B'chakoisa, if you say, Erech alai, my Erech, what the Torah's values are, then we have a whole system there. You're male, female, what age you're at, and that's the amount of money that you have to give. So what happens if a person says, chatzi erke alai? If a person says, I'm going to give half, the Torah says my value is 50 shkolim, I'm going to give half. So you have to give only 25. Nice and chatzi erka, you give half. However, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Like, now if you translate literally, it means you get lashes. We'll see in a minute. Why in the world should you get lashes if you're donating money to the base of Mikdash? But the nice and erech shalom, you have to actually pay the full erech. Even though I said half, I pay full. So before we go further, like am why in the world are you going to get lashes? What do you do wrong here? You want to donate to the base of Mikdash, you give lashes? But Papa, like means we're going to afflict you, we're going to make you pay be'erech shalom, the full value. So we see that the word like also refers to money. And that's what Yehuda meant when he said the word like. So now I'm going to ask a question.
I know, why are you going to punish this guy if he wants to give his value?
Sorry?
Why are we punishing this guy who wants to give to the base of Mikdash?
Okay, I'll tell you why. So punishment of him means he has to pay more than he wanted to. He wanted to give half of his value. We're going to make him pay the full value. Now the question is why? Why are we making him pay the full value? Because there's a difference between a person saying half of my value or value half of me. If he would have said half of my value, the Torah fixes the value of 50 shkolim. He says half of my value is 25. But if he says value half of me, then you have to pay the full amount halachically. And why is that? Because you can't cut yourself in half. If you cut yourself in half, you're going to die. So therefore, if you say value half of me, it's a meaningless phrase. It really, you have to pay the full value. So if you say half of my value, we are worried that if you're going to pay only 25 shkolim, the next time you're going to say the value of half of me, you're going to think also to pay 25. So gzeira, the Rabbanan, that every time you say half, pay the whole. And that's why we use the word like. Anytime you get a punishment more than what you anticipated, it's called like. So it could be talking about money. So in my time, we are worried. If he says half of my value, to next time, if he says value half of me. The erev chetche, if he says a value half of me, since you cannot exist, you cut half your body off. There's no way that you can continue to exist, and therefore you have to pay for your full value. And therefore we make you, even if you say chatzi erka, we're going to make you pay for the full value, and that's why we use the word like. Okay, we'll